The original Nukitashi, developed by Krupo, is one of my all-time favorite visual novels. In fact, it's currently in my top 3. Its sequel, Nukitashi 2, is also one I really enjoy, probably just outside my top 10 VNs. The anime adaptation by Passione began airing in the summer season of 2025, which was fitting and led to a surprising surge in popularity for the series. It also significantly increased viewership for my previous video review on Nukitashi 1 and 2 visual novels. Now that the anime has finished, I want to use this video to compare and contrast the anime adaptation with the original visual novel, sharing my overall opinion on what it did well and what could have been improved. To respect both anime-only viewers and visual novel readers, I'll limit spoilers to specific details and avoid recapping everything, as that would make the video far too long. To start, let's cover the premise for those unfamiliar with Nukitashi beyond its name. Nukitashi's setting is a bizarre one. Seiran Island appears to be a sex-positive utopia where anyone of age can have sex with anyone else of age, no strings attached. In fact, public intercourse is mandated by law. However, beneath this supposed haven lies a darker side. Certain characters refuse to participate in the constant casual sex, and the main character, Junnosuke, carries trauma from his past through peer pressure and being mocked for his impotency and extreme penis size. The darkness runs deeper, as the series reveals that many people, including members of the Sex Enforcing Police, the FS, are on the island because it's their only refuge, a place to find a home and family after troubled pasts or financial struggles. The main plot revolves around a mysterious old man benefactor who wants a sniper lolly, Fumino, shipped to him for unknown reasons, and in exchange he'll fund a rebellion against the island's pervert laws. That's a very brief summary of the plot for both Nukitashi 1's visual novel and the anime adaptation. Now let's discuss the anime adaptation and what it generally adapted well, in my opinion. Overall, the show captured the spirit of the original visual novel, delivering over-the-top, comedy-focused absurdity that highlights the ridiculousness of a sex-positive island where everyone is constantly engaging in intercourse, paired with silly, hentai-esque dialogue. It also handles the serious parts of the story well, including Junnosuke's backstory and the perspectives of characters like Toka, who strive to protect the FS. The first several episodes effectively cover the first half of the common route, showcasing the initial shock value of the island's culture for Junnosuke and his little sister Asane, with them having to adapt to the school's rules, seeing the hilarious guillotine punishment, Nanase helping Junnosuke escape from the FS at school, the two finding a safe sacred base, and being assigned the mission to help Fumino, all the way up to the point where Hinami is saved from a clear pedophile. However, for better or for worse, this is where the adaptation diverges from the VN entirely. After the episode where Hinami is saved, the anime takes a relatively unique direction, blending elements from different routes of the original visual novel Nukitashi 2 and introducing new characters and ideas. Let's start by discussing how the anime incorporates aspects from different visual novel routes and mixes them with other adapted content, showing it's not a linear adaptation. The general flow seems to mirror Nanase's route, with the romantic focus clearly centered on Nanase. Many scenes are based on or taken from her route, such as Junnosuke and her running through a nudist beach, as well as learning the backstory of how Nanase was Junnosuke's childhood friend who accepted him initially. However, content from other routes gets mixed in. For example, in Hinami's route, Junnosuke infiltrates and pretends to join the FS to gather information to safely ship out Fumino. During this, he briefly joins the FS, learns Rei's and others' backstories, and feels enough guilt to eventually leave and spare the FS after realizing they aren't entirely evil. This is generally adapted well in the anime. In the visual novel, there is an H scene where Ikiko basically reverse raped Junnosuke, but it was not in the same context as it was in the anime. In the visual novel, it was just one of many NLNS escape sequences so they didn't have to screw in public after school, where Junnosuke got caught by Ikiko. But in the anime, it was specifically tied to the attempted Fumino assassination of Hitora Bait, and personally, I liked how it was done in the anime more because of the even more over-the-top nature of the reverse rape scenario, turning into a situation where Junnosuke has to turn the tables with his magical dick. Speaking of Junnosuke's magical dick, while this was used as a plot point by Toka in the visual novel, noting that this was how she was planning to take over the country with sex, I liked how the anime went a step further by adding anime original elements like the statue of his dick and even having little scouters to scan his pants to see if his dick was one they were looking for. As for the anime adapting elements from Nukitashi 2, in the original Nukitashi VN, characters Schubert and Susuko, new FS members not introduced in the original visual novel, were integrated into the anime nicely. They don't significantly impact the main story, but their inclusion adds nice continuity. Similarly, Rin Hanamaru, the sister of class rep Ran Hanamaru, was a minor spriteless character in the original visual novel, merely part of a threesome attack to punish males for not participating in sex. In Nukitashi 2, Rin's personality shifts to a stuck-up alpha bitch, and the anime's introduction to her with scenes highlighting this personality was a great way to bridge continuity between the original visual novel with Nukitashi 2. Finally, going back to the scene where Hinami was saved from the pedophile, the location where she was almost raped was actually changed from the original visual novel. In the anime, it was set at a location first introduced in Nukitashi 2, Baby Me Creche, a goofy place introduced for characters who wanted to engage in weird sexual role-playing as little kids. Yeah, this series loves to poke fun at fetishes, that's for sure. However, the anime has some anime original scenes, which, while I'm mostly okay with, do sometimes have some weirdness and indirect flaws. The first major change is that Misaki saves Fumino near the beginning of the anime and hides her in her house. This never happens in the original visual novel, as Fumino is usually saved much later, towards the end of most routes or towards the beginning of her own unlockable route, where she closely bonds with Junnosuke privately before joining. Fumino joining this early in the anime was clearly an attempt to get the whole NL and S together quicker through yet another anime original scene where Fumino is baited into assassinating Hitora. But while Junnosuke introducing the NLNS this way was pretty funny, this setup ends up leading to a scenario where Misaki and Fumino gets much less personal introduction screen time to the main crew compared to Asane, Nanase, and Hinami. So while it's nice that Fumino and Misaki were able to join at the same time, I just don't feel like their close bonds with the group are as convincing as those of the original 4 members, especially since the plot moves at a fast pace to meet an 11-episode quota. This all leads to the next major change, a much heavier emphasis on the guillotine. In the original Nukitashi visual novel, the guillotine was actually only used once, at the very beginning of the visual novel common route, to show how intense the setting is. There might have been references to it here and there, but for the most part it was not nearly as important as it is in the anime adaptation. When Nanase gets caught and the guillotine is used to showcase the ideals of the FS and SHO, I was surprised by how much importance the anime placed on it. I actually like this change because since the anime was already going in a new direction, it made sense to cover elements that were likely left out of the visual novel due to time constraints. Emphasizing the guillotine led to some amusing plot lines and visuals for this anime original route. So far, I've gone over the changes for which I've had mixed to mostly positive opinions compared to the visual novel. However, now I'm going to get a little negative, talking about things that the anime either changed for the worse or more often purposely left out. I understand that the anime adaptation is only 11 episodes, which is barely enough for one route, and even then, it was going to be heavily streamlined and fast-paced. That's basically what I expected. While I still really like how the anime turned out as a whole, there were a lot of things I was hoping to at least see a little bit of that sadly did not get covered, likely because of its relatively short length. My first major complaint is about the comedy. It's not that the anime executes it wrong per se, quite the opposite. The fact that it still relies on the craziness of the setting, a whole bunch of people just screwing in public, it emulates the original VN humor quite well in that regard. The problem is the lack of slice-of-life scenes. I understand that for modern Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience who need quick dopamine rushes, you need fast-paced episodes to keep people interested, leaving little time for slower-paced slice-of-life moments. However, for me, the NLNS group of girls is one of my favorite heroine casts from visual novels, and a large part of that is the amazing banter they share in the slower-paced slice-of-life scenes in the original visual novels. Whether they're just chilling in the secret base under the school or at the Tachibana household, these moments are gold. Sadly, in the anime, the scenes where we get to see them bickering and joking around with each other are incredibly limited. I think one of the biggest losses here is Asane specifically. I can think of at least 3 recurring jokes around her alone that either did not make it to the anime or were heavily reduced. In the anime, she makes a few comments about being a lesbian, except for her big brother, but outside of a part where she gets in Nanase's bosom, she rarely emphasizes her clear attraction to girls, particularly her type, Nanase, and to a lesser extent, Ikuko. The joke around her character in the visual novel was that she was so overtly lesbian in love with Nanase, yet Nanase was a dense protagonist in a way and somehow didn't notice. I was also personally disappointed that they did not have a single joke in the anime about Asane's consent pillow. It didn't appear that often in the visual novel, but when a literal advertisement artwork features Asane with the consent pillow and she never gets the chance to use it in the show, it really disappointed me. Another aspect of Asane that was perhaps a bit more hit or miss, and maybe it was fine that it was not included in the anime, was that both Tachibana siblings can be kind of assholes at times. Asane is the one most likely to make comments about Hinami being a lolly, or Misaki being fat, or Fumino taking away her rightful little sister status. But in the anime proper, while she still has that deadpan way of talking, She's honestly a lot nicer than she was in the visual novel, with most of her commentary in the anime focused on showing support for her big brother, which she does show in the visual novel to be fair. But in the visual novel, it's also mixed in with the two constantly bickering because, like I said, they're both kind of assholes, so it makes sense. However, the objective disappointment I felt about Asane is nothing compared to the personal disappointment I felt with how much they nerfed Misaki. The few times that Misaki is able to joke around in the anime are all great stuff. The problem? She doesn't get to joke that much because of how much the anime is already juggling in 11 episodes. Meanwhile, in the original visual novel, Misaki became one of my all-time favorite visual novel heroines purely because of how ridiculously stupid and weird her jokes were, even compared to the already hilarious jokes from other characters in the visual novel. In the anime, we only get brief mentions of how she calls herself fat, into anal, making blunt, insensitive comments at other people's expense, and only a tiny mention of how she thinks she's too normal and plain looking. However, in the original visual novel, these are jokes she recycles constantly, and admittedly, if you're not a fan of how she treats her weight or lack of presence, then I could see how this could be seen as an upgrade in the anime. But as someone who thought Misaki was easily the funniest visual novel character ever, hell, arguably the funniest fictional character ever, I was really disappointed that some of the best jokes she got in the original visual novel just could not be included in the anime with how it was structured. I was hoping they'd at least include this specific scene from the original Nukitashi where she sings a very unique song when the characters enter the secret base.
あなたの目の前で存在感を放つその女は本当にミスクイーン
But while the lack in comedy was unfortunate, they at least still fit enough jokes between various characters for it to make sense. But what I thought was even weirder in the anime was the lack of escape sequences and fight scenes. In the original visual novel, part of the fun was seeing how the NLNS, after they got together as part of their rebellion, always tried to find ways to make it home after school past the FS, so they did not have to screw in public, pursuing their dreams of sex only with love. Many of these escape sequences eventually escalated into fights with the FS and, in specific, scarier scenarios, with one of the big three, namely Toka, Rei, or Ikuko. Now that I think about it, I don't think they even mentioned the term big three in the anime, which is really strange. Regardless, in the anime, there are only 3 specific notable fight scenes. The one where the crew saves Hinami from the pedophile, the one where the NLNS saves Fumino and Misaki indirectly, and the final battle where they save Nanase from being guillotined. While these scenes were good for what they were, it felt like we rarely got to see what exactly the characters were strong at, whether it be Junnosuke's unpredictable array of tools, Nanase using her athletic nature to escape from enemies in addition to using some of Junnosuke's tools, Hinami's good luck chair, Misaki's incredible skill at clutch bike ride saves, Fumino's superb sniper skills, or Asane's computer-savvy genius and support, since she was the one who developed Junnosuke's special Ariadne goggle tech. We did get some aspects of the team's skills in the anime, but they weren't properly built up besides maybe Fumino's, and it felt really strange for Asane to be directly on the battlefield operation in the second to last episode when she's literally supposed to be the girl who's always backup, and they never once brought up that she's an introverted NEET who can't run for a long period of time. That reminds me, while Junnosuke did technically wear his fancy Ariadne goggles constantly for battles, I was really disappointed that outside one brief scene in the second to last episode, we didn't get one of the fancy scenes from the visual novel where you get to see the cool Ariadne boot up sequence, as well as seeing what Junnosuke sees whenever he gets hit by an attack. By that point, we didn't get to see all the cool little features Ariadne had. The goggles were apparently also a way to mask his teammates' identities so the FS could not find them at school and arrest them, a feature not brought up in the anime. Another major change I have really mixed feelings about is making Nanase the romance option in the anime over Fumino. On one hand, I like the idea of emphasizing her given their past, and it did make the climactic sex scene they had in the second to last episode to save her from the guillotine kind of nice. In a way, the romance would feel the most natural since Junnosuke wasn't too much of an asshole to her in the anime. However, while the romance was technically built up, it did feel just a bit too rushed to get to that point, especially since while Nanase did technically confess to Junnosuke that she still loves him at the end, he never literally confessed back even if it was mostly implied. So I like the anime being an alternate Nanase route in theory, and some of the changes around it were nice, but the anime just juggled so many things so I couldn't get into the Nanase romance as much as I'd like. However, I also feel like the themes of Nukitashi work better when Fumino is the main heroine. She was the daughter of the woman who was something of a mentor to Junnosuke growing up, so it was strange that that part of the backstory was just almost left out entirely. On top of that, Hitora and the old man not being part of the final battle just felt really weird. I know Nanase's route in the original visual novel is considered the best starter route for the series, so I guess that's why they went with it, but I would have liked more of Nukitashi 1's themes from Fumino's route matter more in the anime. Another change I also have mixed feelings on is part of Junnosuke's character. For the most part, I would actually say Junnosuke is actually characterized pretty well. Hearing a visual novel main character actually be fully voiced is always a welcome change since, for some reason, he is unvoiced in the VN like most visual novel protagonists with personality in eroge. Thankfully, I think the anime does a pretty good job nailing the more memorable parts about him, whether it's his anger towards the island for indirectly causing his trauma about being bullied, the silly comments he makes when trying to fight against loveless sex, or his natural emotions when he starts to see the potential good side of the FS that he always saw as pure evil corrupting the island. However, the main thing I have mixed feelings on is the removal of one particular aspect of his character. His initial antagonism towards Nanase specifically. To complement his anger towards the enforced loveless sex rules, he considered Nanase's slutty Gyaru appearance, as well as her fake reputation of being the sluttiest girl at school, to naturally cause him to really focus his anger towards her in the original visual novel, constantly calling her a slut. Even after Nanase saved him in the visual novel, he still gave her a lot of shit that was, quite frankly, undeserved a lot of the time, and he only started to be nicer to her towards the end of routes, especially in Nanase's. In the anime adaptation, this aspect of Junnosuke was basically removed. The most that was shown was Junnosuke making a kind of exasperated comment when Nanase first saved him at the beginning of the series, but outside of that, he was consistently nice to her, treating her as an ally right from the start all the way to the end with no slut insults. On one hand, I'm glad he was a lot nicer and more understanding from the beginning because, honestly, in the visual novel he went way too far at times despite the obvious proof that she was clearly not having sex with anyone on the island and was very much still an actual virgin. On the other hand, I think this was too much of a course correction, which I'm guessing was changed to line up with Junnosuke's relatively nicer characterization in Nukitashi 2, or just because having an asshole main character on screen to one of the main heroines would not look really good. However, I would have thought of something of a middle ground, maybe just take an episode or two of melodrama for him to get over it, instead of a whole route. This could have been the first start of him learning towards acceptance of the island as well as the characters like the FS who could be considered victims of the island's laws. But sadly, what we got was Junnosuke feeling a little bit slightly underbaked despite generally being pretty likable in the anime. One final quick mention. What was previously thought to be an English translation localization change in the original visual novel turned out to also be implemented in the anime adaptation by the original devs, even in the Japanese version, where the main antagonist group's name changed. In the original visual novel, they were called the SS, clearly a reference to the Schutzstaffel, the black uniformed elite corps and self-described political soldiers of the Nazi Party during Hitler's era. In the official translation of the visual novel, this was changed to FS in the text, despite the voice acting still saying SS, which made it seem like it was just a translator or localizer's decision. However, it turns out this was likely the developer Krupo's idea, considering they used FS even in the voice acting in the official anime adaptation. Maybe the original Japanese devs felt some shame for recklessly using a direct Nazi Germany reference and now regret it, especially since they were trying to humanize this antagonist group. I could rant on, but the moral of the story is that I do really like the anime adaptation for what it is. Being able to see even more of the visual standpoint of what the Nukitashi setting was like in the original visual novel, capturing the spirit of the hilarity and the surprising seriousness of it, especially on the themes of acceptance and minorities, insecurities related to body image, but not going too deep so people can eventually read the original visual novel to see the full scope of the original story and even in its sequel. It's just really unfortunate that it was locked to only 11 episodes, maybe because Krupo and Passione were scared of how well a TV series that had to have several different layers of censorship to air on TV versus airing it on streaming services would perform, making it a lot harder to get the budget and or the word out of the series. Thankfully, despite its relatively lower rating on MyAnimeList and AniiList, it's pretty clear that the Nukitashi anime definitely did its job in terms of opening the floodgates to the craziness of a story that I thought would only be stuck in a visual novel and maybe manga. Hell, I know some people in real life who love this anime even though they rarely or have never read a visual novel in their life. And I even know one person who specifically supported the visual novel because he really liked the direction and uniqueness of the story that you basically can't find anywhere else, and he almost never reads VNs. Overall, I really like the Nukitashi anime for what it is, but it's not a 100% replacement for the visual novel, as it only barely touched upon the comedy and the serious themes, which I guess in a way is good. Anime adaptations tend to be an advertisement for people to buy the original source material, and I'd say in that regard it did its job, but I'm just slightly bummed out that some stuff about it could have been better. Still, I really like the overall product, especially viewed as standalone. What are your thoughts on the anime adaptation of Nukitashi or just the Nukitashi series as a whole? Feel free to leave a comment below.